A Treatise of Satan's Temptations. By Richard Gilpin. A Discourse of the Malice, Power, Cruelty and Diligence of Satan. Third part of Chapter 6. Of Satan's cruelty. Instances thereof in his dealing with wounded spirits. The king of Moab took his eldest son that should have reigned in his stead, and offered him for a burnt offering upon the wall. This he did, according to the customs of the Phoenicians and others, being reduced to great straits, as supposing by this means, as his last refuge, to turn away the wrath of his God. Of Ahaz it is recorded, 2 Chronicles 28:3, that he burned his children in the fire, after the abominations of the heathen. That this was not illustration or consecration of their children, though that also was used, but a real sacrificing, is without doubt to Josephus, who expresseth it thus. He offered his son as an holocaust, lambda omicron kappa upsilon sigma tau omega sigma epsilon. But whatever Ahaz did, it is certain the children of Israel did so. They offered their sons and daughters to devils, Psalms 106:37. And if the sacrifices of the dead which they ate in the wilderness, mentioned verse 28, be understood of the feasts which were made at the burning of their children, as some think, though many understand it of their senseless dead gods or their deceased heroes, or for their deceased friends, then this cruelty had soon possessed them. However, possess them it did, as appears also by the description of their devouring Moloch, which the Jewish rabbins say was a hollow brazen image, in the form of a man, saving that it had the head of a calf, the arms stretched in a posture of receiving. The image was heated with fire, and the priest put the child in his arms, where it was burned to death. In the meantime a noise was made with drums, that the cries of the child might not be heard, and hence was it called Tophet, from Toph, which signifies a drum, so that the name and shape of the image shows that it was used to these execrable cruelties. These scripture evidences, if we were backward to credit what histories say of this matter, may assure us of the temper and disposition of Satan, and may enable us to believe what bloody work he hath made in the world, which I shall briefly sum up in these particulars. 1. First, these inhuman, or rather, as Purchas calls them, overhuman sacrifices, were practiced in most nations. Not only the Indians, Parthians, Mexicans, etc. but Ethiopians, Syrians, Carthaginians, Grecians, Romans, Germans, French, and Britons used them. 2. Secondly, these cruelties were acted not only upon slaves and captives, but upon children, whose age and innocency might have commanded the compassions of their parents for better usage. 3. Thirdly, these sacrificings were used upon several occasions, as at the sprouting of their corn, at the inauguration, coronation, and deaths of their kings and noblemen, in time of war, death, pestilence, or any danger, in a word, as the priests in Florida and Mexico used to say, whenever the devil is hungry or thirsty, that is, as oft as he hath a mind. 4. Fourthly, in some places the devil brought them to set times for those offerings, some were monthly, some annual. The Latins sacrificed the 10th child, the annual drowning of a boy and a girl in the Lake of Mexico, the casting of 2 yearly, from the Pons Milvius at Rome into Tiber, are but petty instances in comparison of the rest. 5. Fifthly, we cannot pass by the vast number of men, offered up at one time. So thirsty is Satan of human blood, that from 1 or 2, he hath raised the number incredibly high. In some sacrifices 5, in some 10, in some 100, in some 1,000 have been offered up. It was the argument which Montezuma, the last emperor of Mexico, used to Cortez to prove his strength and greatness by, that he sacrificed yearly 20,000 men, and some years 50,000. Some have reserved their captives for that end, others have made war, only to furnish themselves with men, for such occasions. 6. Sixthly, there are also several circumstances of these diabolical outrages, that may give a further discovery of his cruelty, as that these miserable creatures, thus led to be butchered, have been loaded with all the cursings, revilings, and contumacious reproaches, as a necessary concomitant of their violent deaths. Thus were those used who were forced to be the public, Kappa Alpha Theta Romeo Alpha Tau Alpha, or expiation, for the removal of common calamities. Death also was not enough, except it had been most tormenting in the manner of it, as of those that suffered by the embracements of Moloch. The joy and feastings of such sacrificings, which were in themselves spectacles of mourning and sorrow, were cruelties to the dead, and a barbarous enforcement, against the laws of nature in the living. But the dashing of the smoking heart in the idol's face, and the pulling off the skins, from the massacred bodies, that men and women might dance in them, were yet more cruel ceremonies. And lastly, in those that have been prepared for those solemnities, by delicious fare, gorgeous ornaments, and the highest reverence or honors, as was the manner of several countries, yet was this no other than Satan's insulting, over their miseries, of which we can say no otherwise, than that his tenderest mercies are cruelties. 7. Seventhly, I may cast into the account, that in some places Satan, by a strange madness of devotion, hath persuaded some to be volunteers, in suffering these tortures and deaths. Some have cast themselves under the chariot wheels of their idols, and so have been crushed to pieces. Some sacrifice themselves to their gods. First they outcut off several pieces of their flesh, crying every time, "For the worship of my God, I cut this my flesh," and at last say, "Now do I yield myself to death, in the behalf of my God," and so kills himself outright. 8. Eighthly, it is wonderful to think that the devil should, by strange pretexts of reason, have smoothed over these barbarous inhumanities, so that they have become plausible things, in the judgments of those miserable wretches. In piacular sacrifices, they believed that except the life of a man were given for the life of men, that the gods could not be pacified. In other sacrifices, both Eucharistical and for atonement, they retain this principle, that those things are to be offered to the gods, that are most pleasing and acceptable to us. And that the offering of a calf, or a pigeon, was not suitable to such an end. This maxim they further improved, by the addition of another of the same kind, that if it were fit to offer a human sacrifice, it must also be innocent, and consequently, little children are the fittest for such a purpose. And some have also conjectured, that the devil hath not been a-wanting, to improve the example of Abraham sacrificing his son, or the law in Leviticus 27:28, or the prophecies concerning the death of Christ, as the great sacrifice of atonement, to justify and warrant his hellish cruelty. In some cases, cruelty hath arisen from the very principles of reverence and love, which children have to parents, and friends to friends, as in Dragon, when any are sick, they send to their oracle, to know whether the parties shall live or die. If it be answered they shall die, then their friends strangle them and eat them. And all this from a kind of religious respect to their kindred, to preserve, as they imagine, their flesh from putrefaction, and their souls from torment. The like they do at Java Major, when their friends grow old and cannot work, only they eat not their own friends, but carry them to the market and sell them to those that do eat them. Thanks.